In a land torn by old wounds and new fears, one man's act of kindness ignites a flame that challenges centuries of hatred. This is the story of courage, compassion, and the power of a child's voice to change the world. If you believe in the power of courage and compassion to change the world, make sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you don't miss any inspiring stories like this one. The sun was beginning its slow descent behind the jagged edges of the Texan horizon, casting long golden shadows across the sprawling plains. Elijah Dust Carver stood alone on his porch, the rough wood creaking beneath his boots, eyes scanning the barren landscape that had become both his sanctuary and his prison. The wind whispered through the dry grass, carrying with it the faint scent of sagebrush and the distant calls of hawks circling overhead. Dust's life had been one of solitude since the war took his son away. The quiet was sometimes unbearable, yet the plains held a strange comfort, a promise that nature moved on, no matter the grief buried beneath the soil. He had come to accept that the past was a shadow, always lingering but never catching up. It was then, in the fading light, that he saw her. A small figure, hunched and fragile, staggering near the edge of his property. The girl moved with a fragile strength, like a wounded animal desperate to find shelter. Her clothes hung in tatters, smeared with dirt and blood, and her dark hair was tangled with the dust of the trail she had traveled. Her eyes, deep and wary, flicked toward Dust for the briefest moment before she collapsed onto the earth, breath shallow, body trembling. Without hesitation, Dust crossed the dry grass, heart pounding, not with fear, but with something he hadn't felt in years, the fierce instinct to protect. Kneeling beside her, he gently brushed dirt from her cheek, noticing the thinness of her frame, the cracked lips pleading silently for water. He tore a strip from his own shirt, soaking it in a nearby creek before pressing it to her parched lips. The girl did not speak. She didn't cry. She simply rested her head against his arm, eyes closing as exhaustion overwhelmed her. Dust lifted her with surprising tenderness, feeling the weight of her fragile body against his chest. It was as if he was carrying not just a child, but the fragile hope of a world that could still be saved. Back inside his cabin, Dust lit a fire, the flickering flames casting dancing shadows on the wooden walls. He found a bowl, filling it with warm broth and soft bread. Slowly, patiently, he coaxed the girl to eat. At first, she refused, eyes wide with distrust. But hunger won over fear, and she ate, her small hands trembling as they reached out. That night, Dust made a bed for her beside the fireplace. The girl curled beneath the thin blanket, still silent but no longer tense. Dust sat nearby, the weight of years pressing on his chest. Memories of his son's laughter echoed faintly in the silence. He wondered who this child was, why she was alone in the vast wilderness. As the fire cracked softly, the girl's lips parted, and a single word slipped through the quiet: "Father." Dust's breath caught. The word hung heavy between them, fragile yet powerful. He looked down at the sleeping child, feeling the impossible burden and blessing of this unexpected encounter. Outside, the wind carried the distant howl of wolves. The plains were watching. The past was stirring. And Elijah Dust Carver knew, deep in his bones, that his life was about to change forever. Before dawn, a restless chill settled over the plains, swallowing the last embers of the fire Dust had left burning by the cabin's door. Elijah Carver had barely closed his eyes when the distant thudding of hooves shattered the stillness. His instincts, honed by years of hardship, snapped him awake. Somewhere beyond the pale light of the moon, a force was approaching, fast, relentless, and unmistakably hostile. Dust rose silently, his hand brushing the worn grip of the rifle leaning against the cabin wall. His heart beat not with fear but with the heavy weight of consequences long overdue. He had always known the past didn't forgive easily, and now it had come hunting. Outside, the shadows moved like a storm. 200 strong, a tidal wave of Falcon Rock warriors encircled his humble home with the silent precision of hunters. Their horses pawed the earth, restless and fierce, while the warriors' faces were painted with a mixture of grief, suspicion, and burning anger. At their center stood Raven Eye, the tribe's chief, and Dust now understood with sinking dread, the father of the child he had sheltered. Raven Eye's gaze was a fierce blade cutting through the cold night air. His eyes, dark and unyielding, fixed on Dust with the weight of loss and suspicion. "Who are you to hold my daughter?" Raven Eye's voice was low, but it carried the force of thunder across the silent plains. Dust stepped forward, the rifle steady in his grasp but his hands not trembling. "She was dying. I couldn't leave her to die." Around them, murmurs rose, whispers of old wounds and ancient grudges. The Falcon Rock tribe remembered centuries of betrayal and bloodshed at the hands of settlers, of which Dust was a living symbol. Warriors like Flintclaw spat venomous words, accusing Dust of theft, of desecrating tribal honor. "You've taken her from us. You bring death in your hands," Flintclaw growled, his eyes burning with fierce loyalty to the tribe's customs. Dust's jaw tightened. He had no desire to fight, but neither would he surrender a child who had been abandoned to the merciless land. His voice was firm but measured. "I didn't steal her. She came to me, broken and alone. I gave her shelter, food, warmth. You can judge me all you want, but the truth is plain." The warriors tightened their circle, their weapons glinting faintly under the moonlight. The air crackled with the tension of years, pain and rage threatening to ignite. Luma, the girl, stood beside Dust, trembling but silent. Her dark eyes flicked between the faces around her, filled with a mix of fear and resolve. She did not speak, but her presence was a silent plea for mercy. Raven Eye took a deep breath, his shoulders heavy with the burden of a father's love and a chief's duty. "We will not decide here," he declared. "He will stand before the Council of the Stars. There, justice will be served." Dust nodded, understanding the gravity of the trial to come. As the warriors tightened their hold, he met Luma's gaze. Though her lips were sealed, her eyes whispered a fragile hope. The night held its breath, the past and future entwined in the cold wind. The plains were silent witnesses to a reckoning that could either shatter or heal. The dawn broke slowly over the rugged hills, casting a pale light on the gathering of warriors and elders assembled around the fire circle. Elijah Dust Carver sat bound by rough cords, his eyes steady despite the weight of countless gazes fixed upon him. The air was thick with suspicion, silence trembling on the edge of a storm. The fate of a man, and perhaps the fragile hope of peace, hung in the balance. Around the circle, the faces of the Falcon Rock tribe were carved by years of hardship and pride. Some were painted with anger, others with grief. Among them, Flintclaw paced like a caged beast, his fury barely contained, his every muscle taut with the promise of retribution. He was a man who lived by the old laws, where honor demanded blood for blood, and mercy was a stranger. The elders sat motionless, their eyes sharp and unyielding. They whispered quietly, weighing the words that would soon decide life or death. Dust knew he could not rely on their mercy alone. Then, unexpectedly, a small figure rose. Luma. Barefoot and pale, her small frame seemed fragile beneath the heavy weight of the tribe's eyes. Her lips parted, and the silence was shattered by her voice, clear, unwavering, and filled with a fierce light. She spoke in the tongue of her people, every word carrying the weight of truth and courage. She told them of the cold nights when she had no food, no warmth, when death seemed the only friend. She spoke of Dust's kindness, the bowl of hot stew, the gentle hands, the fire that chased away the cold and fear. Her voice did not tremble. It did not plead. It commanded. She spoke not just for herself, but for the meaning of justice, a justice not rooted in hatred, but in compassion. She described a world where enemies could be friends, where a stranger's hand could save rather than harm. Around the fire, faces shifted. Mothers wiped away tears. Warriors lowered their weapons, the hard lines of suspicion softening. Even Flintclaw's fierce gaze faltered, replaced by a shadow of doubt. Raven Eye looked on, the fierce fire in his eyes tempered by something new, respect, perhaps even gratitude. His daughter had become a beacon, a voice strong enough to challenge centuries of pain and suspicion. When Luma finished, a hush settled over the circle. The flames flickered gently, as if the very fire acknowledged the power of her words. Dust met her gaze, a silent thanks passing between them. For the first time since this ordeal began, hope stirred, fragile, yet unbreakable. The tribe's heartbeat slowed, the promise of judgment held in balance by the courage of a child who dared to speak the fire. As twilight settled over the vast expanse of the plains, the elders of the Falcon Rock tribe gathered beneath the ancient cedar, a sacred tree whose branches seemed to stretch endlessly toward the heavens. The air was thick with solemnity, the sky above painted in bruised purples and fiery oranges, as if nature itself bore witness to the gravity of the moment. Tonight, Elijah Dust Carver would stand before the Council of the Stars, the highest tribunal of the tribe, where fate would be decided. The council was composed of weathered men and women, their faces etched with wisdom and hardship, guardians of tradition whose word was law. They sat in a rough circle, the ground beneath them worn by countless gatherings of justice and counsel. Between them, Dust stood unbound, the silence around him almost deafening. Dust's gaze swept across the elders, his voice steady despite the heavy weight of judgment. He spoke not of defense but of truth, the truth of a man who had lost his own child to a world too cruel, and who had seen in Luma not a prize, but a fragile life desperate for mercy. "I did what any man with a heart would do," he said. "I gave her shelter, food, and safety. I ask not for your forgiveness, but for your understanding." The elders exchanged glances, their eyes sharp and unreadable. The chief Raven Eye rose slowly, his presence commanding the attention of all. He told the story of the girl's disappearance, the fear that had gripped the tribe, and the pain of a father torn between love and duty. "To protect our people, we must uphold our laws," he said gravely. "But to honor our ancestors, we must also embrace justice that is tempered with wisdom." Then, with the gaze of all upon her, Luma stepped forward again. No longer a frightened child, her voice rang clear and unwavering as she shared her deepest hopes, a world where kindness crossed boundaries, where enemies could become brothers, and where justice was not blind, but seeing and understanding. Her words carried a power that silenced even the most skeptical elders. They spoke not only to the council but to the very soul of the tribe, reminding them that tradition was alive, evolving, and capable of mercy. The council retreated into a quiet deliberation, their voices hushed but intense. Minutes stretched like hours as Dust stood, heart-pounding yet resolute. Finally, the eldest elder spoke, his voice a rough whisper that echoed across the clearing. "We spare him. Elijah Carver shall be named Silent Brother of the Falcon Rock. His heart has proven worthy." A wave of relief washed over Dust. Around him, warriors who had moments before spoken of bloodshed now nodded in acceptance. Raven Eye's eyes met Dust's once more, this time with a flicker of respect. As the night deepened, the tribe gathered to honor the decision. Fires burned bright, songs were sung, and a fragile peace began to weave its first threads between two worlds long divided. Dust looked to the sky, the stars blinking down like silent witnesses, and felt for the first time in years a true sense of belonging. Years had passed since that fateful trial beneath the sacred cedar, and the plains had quietly begun to change. Elijah Dust Carver's once solitary ranch was no longer just a place of refuge. It had become a symbol, a crossroads where two worlds met with cautious hope. The wind still carried the scent of sage and dust, but now it mingled with laughter, voices, and the soft cadence of shared stories. The Crosswind Farm, as it was now called, stood firm amidst the wide open land, a neutral ground where settlers and the Falcon Rock tribe gathered each year. Traders exchanged goods, children from both peoples played together, and elders shared wisdom beneath the vast, open sky. It was a fragile peace, born from one man's courage and one child's voice, but it was real. Dust had grown older, his hair streaked with silver and his hands marked by years of hard work. Yet his eyes still held the fierce kindness that had saved a life and transformed a legacy. On this day, as the sun rose soft and golden, a familiar figure approached the farmhouse gate. Luma. No longer the fragile child, she was now a young woman, her presence radiant with strength and grace. Her eyes met Dust's with a warmth that transcended words. She carried with her the weight of her people's history and the promise of a new future. They stood together on the porch, the wind gently stirring Luma's dark hair as she spoke softly, her voice steady and full of meaning. "You didn't save me from death, Elijah. You taught me how to live." Behind her, children from both worlds ran freely, their laughter weaving through the air like a healing song. Around them, the tribe and settlers alike celebrated, dancing, singing, and honoring the bridge that had been built from trust and compassion. Dust smiled, feeling the years of loneliness lift. The flame of hope that had begun with a small act of kindness now burned bright, lighting the path forward. As twilight settled once more over the plains, Dust and Luma looked to the horizon together, knowing that while the scars of the past remained, the promise of peace was a fire that would never be extinguished. Elijah Dust Carver's journey reminds us that even in the darkest times, a single act of kindness can bridge worlds and heal generations. When we choose compassion over fear, we light a path toward hope and peace, a legacy that lives on through the voices of those brave enough to speak the truth. Thank you for watching. If this story moved you, please like, share, and subscribe for more heartfelt journeys that remind us what it means to be human. Together, let's keep the flame of hope alive.